রিসোর্সেস ফর ডেভেলপমেন্ট। ক্যাপিটাল ফর্মেশন, 1 হচ্ছে ক্যাপিটাল গুডস, 2 হচ্ছে ফাইন্যান্সিয়াল ক্যাপিটাল। Formation of capital goods meanings capital accumulation reflects to the process of adding to the country's stock of capital over time, which permits roundabout methods of production and hence greater productivity. This then enhances future income streams to society and consequently raises future consumption. It is the process of adding to our stock of machinery, tools, buildings, and so on over time. If our stock of capital at the end of the year is larger than it was at the beginning, the difference represents the amount of capital we have accumulated during the year. It also goes by the name investment. Annual net investment is the addition to society's capital stock in an accounting year. In a fundamental sense, capital formation is possible when a society produces a surplus of consumer goods sufficient to satisfy the wants of the workers engaged in producing capital. Producing goods which are not themselves consumed during the period. That is to say, capital formation is the difference between production and consumption. The problem of capital formation is concerned with how to get savings out of current production to form capital. Since production is a continuous process, same amount of capital always depreciates in the process of use. The worn out capital must be replaced if the existing stock of capital is to be maintained. So, capital formation necessitates production of new capital goods in excess of the amount required to replace worn out capital. In brief, gross fixed capital formation includes depreciation while net capital formation excludes depreciation. In the words of Todaro, capital accumulation results when some proportions of present income are saved and invested in order to augment future outputs and incomes. New factories, machinery, plant and equipments and materials increase the physical capital stock of a nation, and these vast areas of capital make it possible to expand the level of output of a country. These directly productive investments are supplemented by investment in what is often known as social and economic infrastructures. Roads, electricity, water, sanitation, communication and the like, which facilitates and integrate economic activities. For example, investment by a farmer in a new technology tractor may increase total output of wheat or rice which he can produce, but without adequate transport facilities to bring surplus product in local markets, his investment may not add any value to actual food output. However, capital in a country is formed by foregoing present consumption and diverting these resources to the production of future wealth. Thus, during the process of capital accumulation, one has to make a choice even between present output and future output. The less a country produces for a future consumption, the larger of its resources are utilized for capital formation. And ultimately, capital formation triggers future consumption. But LECs are so poor that they stay at the subsistence level of consumption. It is absolutely impossible on the part of the poor people who form the majority of curtail consumption. The urgency of fulfilling immediate consumption competes for scarce resources, leaving little scope for capital formation. Underdevelopment is not attributed to poor capital formation. They argue that other factors like poor quality of institutions and governance are the prime causes of failure to develop many developing countries. Even then, the importance of capital accumulation is undeniable. Importance of capital formation. Accumulation plays a very important role in the process of economic development of a less developing or developing country. The vicious cycle of poverty in LDCs can be broken through capital formation. The importance of capital formation for increasing production and productivity can be traced to the writing of early history of economic thought. In rich countries, the amount of capital per head is large, while in poor countries it is small. Capital accumulation sets off rich from poor countries in the modern age and the industrial era in general from the past history of the world. The importance of capital formation as a kingpin of economic development is clear from the following facts. First, capital formation is required to provide a growing population with more necessary facilities of tools and machinery of production. All these tools and implement contribute directly to productive process. These facilities may take the form of tangible physical capital like factory, machinery, equipments in both industry and irrigation for agricultural production. It also takes the form of social overheads, investment in roads, transport and communication, health and education, etc. Economic development is impossible in the absence of these crucial elements. Secondly, capital accumulation itself serves as an important vehicle of technical progress. The improvement in the art of production. The British Industrial Revolution was the product of improved technology. Technology provides the benefits of specialization, shorter working hours, and the creation of skilled jobs. Large-scale production. Capital accumulation is similarly the handmaiden of technological progress. A crane Cairn Cross adds development as an ongoing process, resets on the constant injection of new technology and on the capacity to generate and absorb technical change. Thirdly, as the facilities per head of the working population rise, it increases human skills and capabilities, which are examples of human capital. Both education and measures to improve healthcare are two important forms of human capital formation. Education improves the quality of labor as well as the quality of physical capital. The capacity to absorb physical capital is indeed limited by investment in human capital that improves the future growth performance of an economy. Finally, a rapid rate of capital accumulation leads to an increase in the supply of tools and machinery per worker. Output per worker can be increased if we devote more time and labor to the production of more capital goods. However, an important question relating to the policy decisions may be raised here. Is restriction on current consumption necessary or sufficient to promote economic development? The notion of trade-off between current consumption and future consumption is an important element that influences development policy. In other words, capital accumulation has certain costs and benefits. By investing or adding to its existing capital stock, a society can outperform others by producing higher outputs in future years. But it involves the sacrifice of current consumption in order to have a higher future output or consumption. In the words of Richard T. Gill, the process of capital accumulation therefore typically involves a choice between today's consumption and tomorrow's output, between today's between today's consumption and tomorrow's output, between today's comfort and tomorrow's economic growth. The process or the stages of capital formation. Capital accumulation involves the mobilization of an economic surplus to increase the stock of future output and consumption. The question then arises, how is such capital to be created or increased, or in other words, how is capital formation accelerated? As capital formation is the result of savings, it therefore depends on savings out of current income. It is better to indicate three essential stages or process of capital formation. How much capital will in fact be accumulated depends in the first instance on how much is saved. These stages of capital formation are: 1. Creation of savings. 2. Mobilization of savings through a wide range of different sources. 3. The act of investment itself, by which resources are used for increasing the capital stock. Number 1 is creation of savings. Capital formation depends first on saving, both private and government. The volume of saving or propensity to save depends on will to save, and number 2 is power to save. The desire to save or the will to save depends on a variety of motives. People want to remain prepared for unforeseen emergencies. They want to make provision for education and health. Many people save because they want to improve their position and status in life. Savings take place through the financial intermediaries. Anyway, the other motives behind the willingness to save are: number 1, social and political conditions of the country. Number 2, availability of financial infrastructures. The level of literacy of people while making financial transactions through financial intermediaries. Number 4 is the rate of interest on savings. Anyway, the other motives behind the willingness to save are: number 1, social and political conditions of the country. Number 2, availability of financial infrastructures. Number 3, the level of literacy of people while making financial transactions through financial intermediaries. Number 4 is the rate of interest on savings. However, the existence of the willingness to save is not sufficient to induce savings. There must also be the ability to save. Income is commonly regarded as the most important determinant of private saving. Government also save out of receipts from taxation or from profit of nationalized or public enterprises. It also depends on the state of income distribution of a society. Marginal propensity to save is higher for the high income group, while the marginal propensity to consume is higher for the low income group. A society composed of a large number of poor people has the less potentiality in raising the aggregate savings. It may be noted that the volume of investment is handicapped by saving. Thus, the shortage of capital cannot be solved merely by increasing the supply of finance. The two important internal sources of saving are voluntary and involuntary. The volume of saving depends on how much an individual is willing to forego consumption. Such cut in consumption is not possible when the average income is low. In view of this, government may resort to force saving through tax payments, inflationary policy, but through taxes very little amount is collected when the community's income is low. Ability to pay taxes depends on the volume of income. Inflationary financing has dangers too. Mobilization. Number 2 is mobilization or canalization of savings. Mere creation of savings is not enough. The second stage involves mobilization of savings for investment purposes. It depends on the existing existence of a well-organized banking or other financial institutions and capital market, as well as to serve as a conduit between savers and investors. As savers and investors are two different persons in the community, institutions like banks, postal savings banks, insurance companies, etc. help to mobilize savings of them and pass them on to investors. Number 3, conversion of savings into capital assets. The third and the final stage of capital formation consists of actual investment of monetary savings or conversion of monetary savings into capital goods. The volume of investment depends on a variety of factors like the size of the market, both domestic and external, for the outlet of goods and machinery produced, machinery, entrepreneurial skill, availability of critical infrastructure of power, road and transport, and most importantly, government policies. The role of government in the realm of capital accumulation should not be underestimated. In an LDC, the responsibility of the government in this area can never be minimized. In these countries, the rate of capital accumulation is low because of low level of income. Private business also exhibit their apathy towards larger investment, particularly in social overhead projects. In such situations, the government has to play a dominant role in increasing capital stock. Formation of financial capital sources. Now we will concentrate on the various sources from which necessary savings can be mobilized for the purposes of investment. The sources of capital formation are primarily two, internal and external sources. The internal or domestic sources are voluntary reduction in consumption by household and enterprises. An involuntary cut in consumption through taxation, compulsory lending to the government or inflation, absorption of underemployed labor into productive work, profits of government enterprises, etc. External sources of capital formation may come from the investment of foreign capital, restriction of consumption imports, or improvements in the country's terms of trade or good commercial policy. The sources of financial capital, domestic sources. A. Voluntary savings. It has been stated that savings is necessary to fund investment. Savings in an economy comes from three sources: the household sector, the business sector and the government. The nature of savings consists of three types: voluntary, involuntary and forced. Voluntary savings are the savings that come through self-imposed reductions in current consumption out of disposable income of both the household and the business sectors. Since income is the most important determinant of saving or consumption, the voluntary reductions in consumption may not fructify if the average income is very low. Voluntary reduction in consumption or an increase in saving may be made if efforts are made to attract more savings in a more productive way. For instance, various saving promotion schemes may be introduced so that people can be persuaded to save against bad days. Further, people may be induced to divert their savings made in speculative and unproductive investment into more productive as well as non-speculative activities. A.W. Lewis and R. Narkse postulated that disguised unemployment is an important source of saving in LDCs. An underdeveloped economy is often characterized as a labor surplus economy. Labor surplus or disguised unemployment means the existence of large population in the agricultural sector whose marginal product falls to zero. If these labor resources are transferred to the modern industrial sector, it then creates industrial surplus or profit that may be used for further growth and development. Lewis and Narkse have suggested that the use of unemployed or disguised unemployed workers in the industrial sector as well as various consumption projects like road irrigation works, in this way additional permanent capital is formed. To quote Narkse, the state of disguised unemployment implies, at least to some extent, a disguised savings potential as well. As things stand, the unproductive surplus laborers on land are sustained or maintained by the productive laborer engaged in the industrial sector or new capital projects. This then assumes that the transfer of labor from the rural sector is supported by productive members who do not increase their consumption. The productive laborers are thus making virtual saving. They produce more than they consume. The scheme is apparently attractive as no one is required to curtail his consumption. But capital accumulation takes place via reallocation of labor. Thus, the use of disguised unemployment for the accumulation of capital could be financed from within the system itself. This method has the obvious advantage that it makes use at small cost of resources that would otherwise be idle. Anyway, the potential is there, but it is difficult to apply. B. Involuntary savings taxation. There is another method of financing development from domestic sources is the taxation. The generation of additional saving through tax policy can take two main approaches: creation of tax incentives to encourage increased private saving and the use of tax instruments to reallocate investable resources to the public sector. If it is assumed that growth is impaired due to the lack of adequate incentives, then the tax policy is to be designed in such a way that adequate concessions are granted so that incentives to work and save get boosted. But taxation as a method of development finance has its limits and difficulties. While involuntary savings may increase following a cut in consumption, voluntary savings may decline if people try to maintain their old consumption standards. This then reduces the volume of private savings. Moreover, all kinds of taxes adversely affect the willingness and ability to work and save. Thus, while there is a great deal of necessity for raising revenues more by means of taxation, the obstacles to its effective realization cannot be underestimated. C. Inflationary finance. If voluntary and involuntary savings are inadequate, inflationary finance then becomes the mechanism for financial capital accumulation. A government finances its expenditures by money creation as its revenue falls short of expenditure. When financing of expenditures by money creation is made, there occurs an increase in aggregate spending. When idle productive capacity exists or if the country's resources are underemployed, increased spending may stimulate aggregate output or income till the full employment is reached. As a result, aggregate savings of the community becomes large, which can be used for capital formation to accelerate the level of development. Most importantly, as soon as the state of full capacity is reached, deficit financing causes inflation to flare up. A high rate or an erratic rate of inflation distorts all economic calculations. It may distort the patterns of capital formation. It may encourage the flight of capital to abroad, tax-free havens where people park their money to have an assured profitable return on invested money. In view of this problem, it is argued that this kind of financing is an evil but unnecessary evil. Growth is positively related to inflation up to a certain rate of inflation and then negatively related. External sources, most of the developing countries have to supplement domestic savings as investment in these countries exceeds saving capacity. It is the foreign borrowing that supplements domestic saving to bridge the savings investment gap. In filling the saving gap or domestic resource gap, foreign capital provides the necessary capital stock. But usually developing countries import more than what they export. To finance import, foreign exchange gap needs to be bridged. This can be done by drawing foreign exchange reserves. Since developing countries fail to build up large foreign exchange reserves because of excess of imports over exports, they then rely greatly on external financing. The capital assistance provided by government to government economic aid, the private investment of foreign capital and the loans from the international agencies like the IMF, the World Bank, etc. Foreign assistance help in promoting domestic savings, and on the other, many of the capital goods required for growth is required to be imported with the help of foreign assistance. Such inflow of foreign capital thus adds additional capital but also allows domestic capital to be utilized in production. In this way, it increases a country's potential for greater investment required for higher growth. Foreign investments are usually made in capital-intensive projects. It then provides direct employment to many workers and stimulates the economy by raising income in that process. Further, multinational corporations or companies, MNCs, not only import capital but also act as the vehicles for the transfer of advanced technology to developing countries. But the cost of external financing may often outstrip the benefits received by the recipient countries. It is argued by many that aid is unnecessary for development. It is inimical to development by fostering foreign dependence. It weakens development effort and creates distorted consumption and production structures. Historical experience shows both successes and failures of foreign assistance in garnering resources for development. Finally, economic policy is considered as an important determinant of such external financing.